I'm Lisa Shepard, and I am the Executive Director of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism. The mission of the CJCP is to enhance professionalism among North Carolina lawyers, judges, and law students, a mission which it has been doing since 1998. One of the ways that the CJCP does this is to sponsor this historical video series, which is a collection of video interviews of distinguished lawyers, judges, and professionals from across North Carolina. The CJCP began filming these video interviews in 2000 as a means to preserve the thoughts of these bar leaders on the legal profession and on professionalism issues. All of the videos in this series are available to you on the CJCP website and the CJCP's dedicated YouTube channel. We are so fortunate to have had many distinguished members of the North Carolina Bar over the years, and they have much accumulated wisdom to share with us. It is important to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and doing it well requires not only substantive knowledge that one gains in law school and from studying for the bar exam, but also the value of experience learned from other lawyers. I hope that this video series will give you not only a fresh insight into the person being interviewed, but also some meaningful information about how to be a better lawyer in your own practice. Enjoy, and remember, esse quam videri. Strive to be professional in all that you do, rather than to merely seem so.
Welcome to the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism historical video series. Today we're fortunate to have with us one of North Carolina's most outstanding lawyers, one who has set the professionalism standard in Charlotte, in Mecklenburg County, and throughout North Carolina for years. He is Mr. Francis I. Parker of the Mecklenburg County Bar in the firm of Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein. Mr. Parker has been an outstanding member of the North Carolina Bar in so many ways, and I'd like to share just a little bit with you from his resume before we get started. Mr. Parker was the president of the Mecklenburg County Bar in 1969 and 1970 and was on many of their committees. He, of course, has been a member of the American Bar Association, the North Carolina Bar Association, the North Carolina State Bar. He was a member of the Mecklenburg Bar Foundation and was its president in 1986 through 1991. He's been a member of the Board of Trustees of Johnson C. Smith University from 1967 to 1998 and received an honorary Doctorate of Laws degree in 1978 from that university. He's been very active in Christ Episcopal Church. He's been an outstanding member of the Board of Directors of the Pennick Home, which is the Episcopal Home for the Aging in Southern Pines. He went to and is a devoted alumni of the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill and has been a member of most of their alumni organizations and been very active through the years. He was an Associate Justice with the Supreme Court of North Carolina in 1986. He was a member of the North Carolina and is a member of the North Carolina Board of Law Examiners. Started as a member in 1972 through 1986 and was a chairman in 1985 and 1986 and now is an emeritus member since 1987. He's been on the executive committee of the Thompson's Children's Home, board of Mecklenburg County Council for the Boy Scouts of America, was the director of the Legal Aid Society of Mecklenburg County and president in 1970 and 1971, vice chairman of the Board of Trustees of North Carolina State Bar's Client Security Fund, which he's still an active member in. His civic activities are tremendous and lengthy, and I will not go into all of those today. I don't have time to go into all of those today, but I did a little bit of an introduction so you'd know what an outstanding gentleman and lawyer he's been throughout his career. And with that, I'd like to welcome today Mr. Parker, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Mr. Parker, if you will, tell us a little bit about your early background in education, where you grew up, and a little bit about your family.
Well, I was born on August 21st, 1923 in the St. Peter's Hospital in Charlotte. My family lived there, and I have lived in Charlotte all my life, except when I was away at school and in the service. I attended the Charlotte city schools, and when I got to the high school, I was sent away to Woodbury Forest up in Virginia, and then entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and went through the university's law school.
Yes, sir. Now, as I understand it, your father was a lawyer and was also a judge. From what I understand, he was a judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
He was also one of the judges in the Nuremberg trials. And what influence, if any, did your dad have on you in your early career as a lawyer? And did he have any effect on your decision to become a lawyer?
Well, my father, of course, is my hero, and he was appointed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in 1925, and remained on that court for the rest of his life, time of his death in 1958. I was 2 years old when he went on the bench, so I never remember him as a lawyer. But I guess from my earliest recollections, I was exposed to lawyers and judges. I was the youngest child in my father's household. And although my father never suggested that he thought I ought to be a lawyer, he always told me I ought to do whatever it was I thought I was going to be happy doing. And as long as I was prepared to work hard and give it my best shot. I would say that the exposure, he being my father, and the close association that we have, that I developed pretty early on the belief that lawyers were a member of an ancient, honorable, and noble profession. Although as a young fella, I really didn't picture myself much as a lawyer. I had some ambition or notion of going to the Naval Academy and being a career naval officer. I don't know what my father thought about that, except he said if when the time came, if I really wanted to go, he'd see if he could help me get in.
Right. Now, you did have some association with the Navy, as I understand it, following your time in Chapel Hill, but when you were in Chapel Hill, I believe you were in the Naval ROTC program, were you not?
Yes.
Tell us about those days in Chapel Hill and the ROTC program.
Well, I entered Chapel Hill in the fall of 1941, and shortly thereafter, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and World War II became a reality. I suppose on the campus at Chapel Hill at that time, most of the guys were pretty anxious to get out and win the war. And I guess most of the girls who were there thought that was not a bad idea. I volunteered in the Naval Reserve and was accepted in the Naval ROTC there at Chapel Hill. During the upheavals of those times, it was somewhat difficult to pursue the intellectual avenues that were available to you, because I guess most of us thought we ought to be out winning the war. But I did manage to major in political science with a pretty heavy dose of history and naval science. I was commissioned an ensign in the Naval Reserve in January 1945. and ultimately ended up on a destroyer out at Okinawa at about the time they dropped the bomb. I guess it was on the way home in the latter part of 45 and 46 that I had appreciated that I was not going to the Naval Academy and was not going to make Navy a career, and decided what I guess I'd always known, that I was going to pursue the law. And I remember writing my father a letter, he being in Nuremberg at the time, and told him that there were lots of law schools to go to, but I was glad to get home, and I thought I'd go to Chapel Hill.
Was it difficult to get in Chapel Hill Law School at that time?
No, I got returned to Charlotte, I guess, about July of 46, and drove up Chapel Hill and saw Dean Wederick, and it was pretty easy. I think you had to establish the fact that you had a college degree from somewhere, and maybe more important, had a place to live.
When you went to law school at Chapel Hill in 1946, was there emphasis at that time on ethics and professionalism? Do you remember that being a part of the curriculum?
I don't recall ever having taken any course on ethics or professionalism. The faculty at Chapel Hill at that time was pretty well situated. The faculty was small, and they had all been there for a good many years. There was Dean Robert Wederick and Maurice Van Hecke, who had been a former dean, and of course Albert Coates and Fred McCall, all of whom were gentlemen and teachers of the first class. And over the years, occasionally they would be mentioned of what was expected of lawyers, and but I don't recall any particular curriculum about it.
Okay. So at that time, the emphasis that you may have garnered on ethics and professionalism came from your professors and how they taught you should act as lawyers.
That's right. They occasionally would refer to sharp practices,
Right.
which you weren't supposed to do.
Right.
And I guess the law school basically was an extension of the university's honor system, in that you were gentlemen and ladies. I think there were about 3 or 4 ladies in our class. And you didn't lie, cheat, or steal, and you didn't associate with those that did.
What year, if you recall, did you finish in Chapel Hill Law School?
49.
Okay. And when you finished in 49, how did you decide where you were going to go to practice?
As I say, I lived in Charlotte all my life, and that's where my friends were, my family. And I guess it was the summer after my first year in law school, which was the summer of 47. I came home from Chapel Hill and decided I would maybe get gainfully employed down at one of the banks. So that was in the days when you could stroll into the office of the president of the First Union. Oh, it wasn't First Union then, it was Union National. And I did, and the president was very cordial to me, but he said they had a certain amount of summer internships, and I was a little late since they had already hired all the people from Davidson they were going to hire, and they didn't need any more. And shortly thereafter, I saw Joe Greer, who was a friend of our family's. He was a contemporary of my older brother, John, and he at that time was practicing in the firm of Tall, Clarkson, and Greer. And he asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I just went down to see a fellow down at First Union, and they didn't need any help, so I'm not doing anything at the moment except playing a little tennis, maybe. He says, why don't you come on down to the office sometime and I'll show you around. So I did, and Truth about it, it's been there ever since.
Tell us about the firm that you started with in 1949, where it was situated, what the building was called, and what practice in law was like in Charlotte in 1949 in the early 50s.
The firm was known as Tolliver, Clarkson and Greer, and they had an office in the old Charlotte Law Building, which was right there on the courthouse square, so to speak, right next to the courthouse. Lawyers in Charlotte, when I was sworn in, there were me and 3 others, as contrasted now with something over 100 each year. And the bar, most of the lawyers maintained their offices in the Charlotte Law Building, which was a 8-story building. Although there were some experts in taxation and one thing or another who were known as uptown lawyers. And as a young lawyer or any lawyer that was in the law building, you'd see about 75% of the bar every day, either going back and forth to the courthouse or riding on the elevator or in the soda shop where a lot of tall tales were told.
Right.
And the firm consisted of 3 partners, and I was the associate, and they had engaged in a general civil practice with some forays into the criminal field, but not seriously. And being the youngest fellow there, I got to do an awful lot of things that the other people didn't want to do, which was good training. And you would be what is now referred to as a Renaissance lawyer, which is some fellow who is now, I suppose, fool enough to try to do everything.
When you started, you said there were 4 members of your firm, 3 partners and you, the associate.
Mm.
How many members are now in that firm?
I would say 150, give or take a few.
And that same firm has been in existence for how many years approximately?
Well, we count our nativity back to Judge Harriet Clarkson, who moved to Charlotte and started practicing law in 1884. We celebrate what we called our centennial in 1984.
When you first started, and I know you said you were in a general practice firm at that time, did you have any mentors, anybody that you considered your mentor or mentors that you looked up to and respected?
Well, I would say any of those 3 partners. I, of course, still feel pretty close to Joe Greer, although we don't practice law together anymore. And Mr. Tolliver and Judge Clarkson. I always, Mr. Tolliver was just a perfect, ethical gentleman, as indeed was Judge Clarkson. And I remember one particular instance about Mr. Tolliver. He used to think, in many instances, that a lawyer was his client's conscience. And there was an event that happened. I hadn't been practicing very long, and one of the firm's established clients had gotten in some terrible scrape when they were trying to make a lot of money fast. And they came into the office one day to see Mr. Tolliver, and he sent me out to do a lot of legwork and get him up a little report and memorandum, which I did. I remember one day Mr. Tolliver came into my office and said, Mr. So-and-so and his associates are coming in, and I want you to sit in there with me, because I might forget some of those things you told me about. So that conference went along, and finally Mr. Tolliver says, well, your problem is such and such, and I believe we can help you. We'll do the best we can. Then he said, tell me how it is you got into this matter to start with. And I'll never forget the sheepish look on this client's face. He says, Carroll, we didn't come to you because we knew you wouldn't let us do it, and we figured we could get away with it. And you know, I sort of figured that maybe that's about the best compliment a fellow can pay a lawyer.
Absolutely. And do you think it's important for young lawyers today who don't start with a large firm like yours? There are young lawyers who start out on their own or in a two-man firm with two law students together. Is it important for them to have a mentor when they first start practicing?
I think so. And I think the bar in Charlotte has attempted to foster that, although I don't know how successful it's been. I remember when I started, there were some of the older lawyers would associate young lawyers in a particular case to serve two purposes. I guess maybe the first thing was that they had an opportunity to earn a fee, as well as the older lawyer had an opportunity to have some connection with the younger lawyer and vice versa. I'm not sure anybody does that anymore, but maybe they do. I can remember, although I was associated in our firm, several lawyers got me involved in some of their matters.
And even though you started out in a general practice capacity, it's my understanding that your practice gravitated more towards real estate law.
That's true.
As time went on.
Yes,
Tell us about perhaps any differences that you noticed in the real estate practice over the last 40 years.
Well, the real estate practice that we knew 40 and 50 years ago has virtually disappeared, in that the so-called basic title examinations are now done by paralegals, with a few lawyers participating actively, but not many. That all might be not to slander paralegals particularly. They do what they're instructed to do, except I suppose that the bar has suffered from that, as well as title insurance companies.
In advising young lawyers who start out in a real estate type practice today, what suggestion or advice would you give to them based on your experience and time at the bar? Time in the deed vault, pulling those old books down.
Well, they pretty obviously not going to do that. The Register of Deeds has been fairly well computerized, and although I consider or some people consider me somewhat of an expert in real estate matters, I would not pretend to go in there at all. I haven't been in there in 6 years, and I don't know how to turn those things on. The practice has gotten to be representations of developers and lenders, all of whom want everything done now, and they want it done cheaply, and it's pretty irritating.
It's important for young lawyers to understand the difference between making money and servicing a client and doing what's right.
Yeah.
What advice would you give in that regard if a developer comes in who's pushy and is insisting on things being done quickly and maybe not necessarily in accordance with the codes and the rules? What advice would you give in that arena?
Well, that's pretty tough. A lawyer basically has got to understand what's right and stand for the right, although that's maybe gets to be sort of a trite statement. A lawyer can't have his or her ethics determined by the client, even if it means losing the client. But most people are reasonable business people, and they ought to, and some good many do, understand the situation. If somebody if a lawyer purports to be his client's lackey and is going to go around and engage in activities that he knows he ought not, he sooner or later is going to be in real trouble.
Now, after practicing for a short period of time in Charlotte, the Korean conflict occurred.
Yeah.
Did you have to go back in, or did you volunteer to go back in? Tell us about that period and how that affected you.
I didn't volunteer. It used to be that once you were commissioned in the Naval Reserve, you never really got out. When World War II was over, all the commissioned people were separated to inactive duty and went into what they call the Volunteer Reserve. They also had the Organized Reserve. In the Organized Reserve, you got paid some stipend for engaging in once a week maybe in some training exercise and going off a week or so during the summer to some training cruise. I was in what was called the Volunteer Reserve, be it voluntary or involuntary. But when the Korean business came along in 1950, the Navy called up a lot of its volunteer people in the volunteer reserves, and I went back to sea on another destroyer for about 18 months. My firm gave me a leave of absence. And they fortunately were still there when I came back and appeared to be glad to see me.
And did that, after practicing and starting your family in Charlotte, that time away, leaving again to go back in the service, did that in any way affect your opinion about the profession, about professionalism, the discipline that you needed in your life? Did that affect you at all?
Well, yeah, I suppose it would. I didn't do anything in the Navy that was in any wise comparable to practicing law, although that's not true either. I was a legal officer on this destroyer, which consisted of being the, among other things, trial counsel on a summary court-martials that were handled there on the ship before if it got to be a serious matter, they got sent to a general court-martial on the beach. But from my Navy experience, I learned pretty definitively about duty and responsibility. And I mean duty and responsibility to superiors as well as to subordinates. And I guess the thing that came closest home to me was it's right hard to supervise somebody if you don't really know what it is they're supposed to be doing. And you better find out.
Right. And that applies whether you're dealing with sailors or lawyers, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yes. What difference do you see today in the legal community and young lawyers compared to when you started in the 50s?
Well, I think I said that in Charlotte we were sort of all together, and I saw them every day, a good many of them. And as time progressed, the bar at that time was a little over 100. When I was president of the Mecklenburg Bar, we figured it was about 500. That was 20 years later. There are now about close to 3,500 lawyers in Charlotte. The old law building is gone, and a monstrous jailhouse has been built there, which is probably the biggest building in Charlotte, which is unfortunate that the biggest production on the governmental plaza is the jail. The community of lawyers, the camaraderie, and the collegiality has suffered a great deal, in that you never see many of them. Used to be that you knew everybody basically who was there, or knew a whole lot about them if you didn't physically know them. And there was a standard practice in Mecklenburg that you never took a default judgment when you were entitled to one if you knew that the defendant was represented by counsel.
Is there a suggestion that you could make to lawyers today in large metropolitan areas to maybe better help the collegiality and civility in a particular case when you start a case with a lawyer you don't know or haven't had an occasion to meet before?
It obviously is something that you have to make a definite, concentrated effort to do. Charlotte, and it doesn't seem like it was awful long ago, but I guess it was 20 years ago, the bar attempted to have a luncheon every week, every Thursday maybe, at a place. And it was very enthusiastic, and it went on for several months. And I remember, but it began to dwindle away. And I remember Joe Greer came into the office one afternoon and said, "Well, the bar's been disgraced." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I went over to the courthouse and got 3 Superior Court judges and took them out to the bar's luncheon, and there wasn't a solitary soul there." I says, "Well, that is pretty disgraceful." I'm glad he didn't ask me where I was.
What advice would you give to high school students or college students who are thinking about making a law a career?
Well, I think that they ought to understand that the practice of law is a profession, and that a profession is different from other activities, although it's sort of gotten to be a business of here late. The financial aspects of it are secondary to the, as I believe Roscoe Pound described the profession as being a group of persons, although I think he said men, but he said it a long time ago. Right. Engaged in the pursuit of learned art as a common calling in the public interest. And the important part of that statement is the public interest, and that lawyers are concerned with a good deal more than just representing their clients.
Tell us about your feelings about pro bono service and community service by lawyers.
Well, I think that lawyers either ought to engage in a certain amount of pro bono work, or if they're not going to do the work themselves, they ought to support other lawyers and groups that do. There are a good many people that need a lot of legal help. And I guess as a group, well, the various legal aid societies can, and I think do a pretty good job of representing people who are indigent, and the people, individuals or corporate who are wealthy can afford to hire the best lawyers and pay exorbitant fees. In between, there's a great group of people who have got great misgivings about lawyers, about it's going to cost them an arm and a leg, and don't seek legal services. And it seems to me that it's that group that somehow needs to get targeted by the bar.
We've also seen a decline in lawyers in our legislature, lawyers in public service. Was there greater emphasis when you first started for lawyers to participate in community and statewide service?
Well, I think so. Of course, that was in the days when that might have been the lawyers' best form of advertisement. They didn't have business development committees in those days, and the lawyer got known by stirring around out in his community and his church and civic clubs and civic organizations. I always remember the famous story attributed to Sam Ervin the senator, who had a lot of funny stories. But he always would cite from time to time the young lawyer's prayer was, "O Lord, stir up strife amongst our people, lest our servant perish."
Thank you for that. He was quite a character. You've served on the Board of Law Examiners
Oh, yes.
from 1972 to 1986, although since that time you've continued to be active with that group, as I understand it, and were.
Well, I'm an emeritus member, and they used to call me back to grade some papers when they got in trouble. Right. Now, being emeritus is you get invited to the annual meeting.
Tell me about your service on the Board of Law Examiners.
Well, the primary purpose of the Board of Law Examiners is to conduct the bar examination and test the so-called minimum competence of the applicants, which is a relatively tedious operation of preparing an essay examination and then reading all the exotic answers you get to the various questions. The other function of the board is to attempt to determine that the applicant is possessed of a good moral character and is entitled to the trust and confidence of the public. And the board, I'm sure, still spends a good deal of time wrestling with those problems. I'm also now a member of the Client Security Fund, and you might say the examiners have not done a very good job.
What would you say that the lawyers of North Carolina could and should do to improve upon the elements of principles of professionalism, such as civility and competence, honesty and integrity, respect for the law, pro bono service, community service, mentoring? What emphasis would you put on professionalism as far as our present bar is concerned?
Well, that's a pretty tough, comprehensible question that covers an awful lot of territory.
Yes, sir.
What the actual bar can do, other than conducting continuing legal education programs. Lawyers, I guess, are like everybody else. I used to think lawyers were several cuts above, and probably we still are. But we have suffered a great deal from the cultural revolution of the 1960s, I guess. And how you go about so-called putting the genie back in the bottle, I don't know.
Do you think judges can help in the area of professionalism?
Yes, judges ought to be the leaders of the bar, and hopefully they were all good professionals before they got to be judges. And I think that judges do, by and large, control their courtrooms. And if lawyers are taking advantage of the system or not showing the proper respect for the court, or if indeed other counsel or witnesses and clients, I think that's the judge's responsibility. I remember a funny story. Doesn't exactly involve lawyers, but does involve a judge. There was a judge was trying a case involving title to land, which was pretty obviously a trumped-up sort of case. And he tried it and then instructed the jury and gave them a virtual peremptory instruction for the defendant. The jury went out and came back in about 10 minutes with judgment for the plaintiff. The judge supposedly very courteously thanked them for their services. This being back in the days when the jury were all male. And he says, "Gentlemen, I want you to know and understand that it takes 13 men to steal a piece of land in this state, and I'm not going to be one of them. And I'm going to set your verdict aside." Which maybe there ought to be more of that going on, you know?
Yes.
Especially when you get to these cases where lawyers are collecting all these exorbitant fees in these class action suits, you know?
Well, and I think our judges are going to become more and more involved in professionalism. And
I think so.
When you remember the many people you considered outstanding lawyers during your career, what was it about them that set them apart and made them outstanding in your mind?
Well, I think basically their impeccable moral character, their I thought that they were courageous. They didn't object to taking unpopular adversarial positions when they thought their cause was right. They were gentlemen, they were courteous, and they worked hard. They expected a lot of people, expected a lot of themselves.
We've become a society intent on winning. Do you have any advice to young lawyers on the importance of justice and doing a job correctly rather than winning at all costs?
Well, I suppose the best answer to that, which is maybe the motto of the office of the United States Solicitor General, and it might be engraved on somewhere in Washington on some marble statue, or and I'm not sure I'm quoting this exactly right, but it says in substance, the government wins when justice is done, which means that the Solicitor General believed that whether he'd won the case in the Supreme Court or lost it, if justice prevailed, that was a win.
Absolutely.
But that's not exactly the way it gets translated down the line.
You've had an exemplary career, certainly one of the most successful in our state. What thing or things do you consider your most outstanding contributions or achievements?
Well, I suppose my service on the Board of Law Examiners was the most significant thing that I really engaged in. Other than in the practice, some personal assistance that was rendered some clients that gave us all a good feeling. And sometimes you didn't even get paid.
Sometimes those are the best.
That's right.
You told me before we started a quote that is attributable to Abraham Lincoln. Maybe that would be a good way of wrapping up. Share that thought with us again, if you would, please, sir.
Abraham Lincoln is alleged to have said in some address to some lawyer group in 1850, "Resolve to be honest in all events, and if in your judgment you cannot be an honest lawyer, resolve to be honest without being a lawyer. Choose some other occupation, rather than one in the choosing of which you do in advance consent to be a knave."
Thank you so much. Mr. Parker, on behalf of the Chief Justice's Commission on Professionalism, thank you so much for all you've done for the people, the lawyers, and the judges of North Carolina, and for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.